get started then. Interestingly, we ended this morning with the topic of defense, increasing our defense power. And in fact, we're taking off from there, talking about media, which is also very much so, and you're nodding in the frontier because you mentioned that point this morning. It is very much a matter of defense, how strong our media are, how resilient our democracies are, really depends on how strong our media ecosystems are, how trusted the information is that citizens can have access to, and how truthful, how factual the information is citizens can have access to. And this is about from polarization to media as an empowering platform-driven thought. Very many people have that theory that polarization is also a matter of social media, that it came into this world when social media was invented. Remember, the iPhone was launched in 2007, so about almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago, and with the apps and everything. But in fact, polarization is something that has actually fueled the media forever. Media has always been about polarization because it has been a very lucrative business model to drive conflict. Remember, tabloids have driven polarization, and that was really the main thing that was really selling newspapers, for example, driving polarization. So now traditional media organizations find themselves in an interesting role because they're discussing more and more, should we still drive polarization and aim for clicks? But will this really be good for our societies, or do we need to rethink our role and optimize for factualness and for togetherness and for a common good? So that is a really critical question here. And we are at a turning point, at a crucial turning point here, because AI has begun to reshape much of our media system. AI-based tools, particularly generative AI, will pervade and have already begun to pervade all stages of media production and consumption. So even news gathering is and will be influenced increasingly by AI. News production will be influenced by AI, and news distribution will be influenced by AI by making news much more personalized, hyper-local. So that could lead to further polarization, because it will lead to, in the end, if you think about the current system, thinking consequentially, it will lead to tons of audiences of one when you have your own media world. And as a democracy, as citizens in a democracy, we cannot want that, to have millions and billions of audiences of one. We need to have common ground. We need to have agreed upon facts, because this is the only way democracies work upon. There are threats there, but there are actually huge opportunities there, particularly for Europe, to reshape that very information infrastructure that we will be encountering. And I'm very pleased to have panelists here who have a lot of thoughts on this, who have done a lot of thinking about how to shape these information infrastructures. And first of all, I'll hand over for the introduction to Erika Stiel von Holstein, the CEO of Re-Imagine Europe, for her introductory words.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to stand here because I think it breaks a little bit and it becomes more active. First of all, thank you very much, Alexandra, for your introductory words. And it's really nice to be here these days and to work in these constructive ways. And I think I want to tell you a little story in the beginning, because I see that throughout all the conversations we have had. So I run an organization called Re-Imagine Europa, and I worked for many years with former President of France, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. And this is not all to give a big publicity to the organization, but with a fundamental ethos that was the reasoning why he created this organization. So he actually participated in the Second World War, and he saw how the old world of before that was not working anymore, how much it had destroyed, and that it was impossible after the Second World War to go backwards. So they had to go forward. So from that confusion, that chaos, all of that, he had a very different view of what was possible, because during those years, they created the international order that we have today. They created the European Union. They created the Bretton Woods systems. They created most of the UN organizations that we live in today. So for him, thinking about the future was always about imagination, plasticity. Was it possible? What are the problems? And he felt it so funny with my generation, who instead, we had a very different perspective. We started with the thing that everything exists already. It's there. And how do we fix the problems? How do we kind of tinker on the things? And he felt that that was not enough, that we were now living through the biggest transformation, a very big transformation, similar to what had happened when he was young, and that was the arrival of digital technologies. For him, that was the third big communication revolution in history, the first being writing, and that took 2,000 years to tame. Everything changed. The second one was the printing press, which in Europe took 300 years to master. So the fact that we would expect nothing to happen with the digital revolution, where concepts such as space and time change, he felt was very naive. So we needed that plasticity. Hence, he created Re-Imagine. So that's the starting point where we're coming from, all this long story, to say, how do we reimagine significantly, profoundly, what it is we need in the future? So with this, Maria João Rodrigues in November, December, I think, of last year, when we had the American elections, we saw that was happening in Romania, called and said, we need to do something drastic on the media environment. We have lost control of the media ecosystem in Europe. We have on the one side, we have the Chinas, the Russias, Iran, and the broader element there. On the other, we have Elon Musk and the private companies. And we have realized in Europe, all countries, that we are no longer in control. We don't know what's happening. Vera Jourova, the former executive vice president of the European Commission, she reminded me once, she used to be commissioner for consumers. And she said, I know how much we spend in Europe every year to protect our stomachs. We spend a fraction of that to protect our minds, and that has to change. So with this in mind, we really started to say, what do we need to do to affect our media ecosystem? And I've been part of this discussion for over 20 years, and it's been the same very much for 20 years. And I said, now we have a huge opportunity, because not only do we have digital, but we have AI. And AI is going to radically change everything again. So how do we use our strengths to our advantage and leapfrog? Let's not start thinking about creating a European Twitter or a European anything that works now, because the future is going to be very different. Today, most people find their information, at least when I talk to the younger people in my office, they're not going to a newspaper website, they're not going to the television, maybe podcasts, some, but it's mostly you ask AI. You can choose whatever AI you want, but you're asking them, what do I need to know today? What do I need to do this? And once you realize that, and we'll hear more from Annette later, has some wonderful examples on this, you say the most important element in the media ecosystem during AI is going to be who controls the algorithm and what data is it trained on. This is going to drastically change how we count what we can do, but also how we think about data protection. The ethics around this is going to change very much. And our question was, can we find a different way to think about this that can lead Europe into the next media revolution? So not recover what we lost. I think we all have a bit PTSD when it comes to how badly we dealt with the digital media ecosystem, but actually think strongly. The first element that we came there was to say we need to stop thinking about this as industrial policy. This has to be thought of as a critical infrastructure for our democracies, first of all, and we need to put the money behind it that we need. But this is not only about money, this is about construction. So first of all, how do we do this mind shift? Second, how do we, and we came up with an idea that we called the European Media Grid, and we're on purpose calling it a media grid. All metaphors have pros and cons, because it's really positioning it as an infrastructure. And also the fact that can be public-private, it can be decentralized, it can have all these elements that a media ecosystem of the future will be. Because the question will be, are our media trained on American data? Is our future going to be trained on Chinese data, Nigerian data, Russian data? It doesn't really matter. If it's not trained on European data, our way of thinking is going to disappear. There's a really interesting statistics from philosophy where they've tested how long it takes to change your mind on something as polarizing, say, as vaccines. How long do you think it would take me to change your mind on vaccines? Most of you will say, Erica, thank you very much, but I have made my research. Thank you. 6 to 12 months is what it takes. And this is because we have to remember, one, we are emotional beings who reason. We're not rational beings who feel. So we use our rationality to justify our emotions. Secondly, we do not think as individuals. We think as societies. We're biological beings. So fitting in with the group is more important to us than sticking to our guns, because in our biological history, if we were ostracized from the group, we would probably die. So these are very important elements, and that's why you can see in the past year we have gone to extreme polarization. And this goes very, very quickly, because once the groups are thinking more in one way, we will change our minds. So that's why this is so important, because the question is, are we going to have autonomy of our own thoughts? Or are our thinking patterns going to be decided by foreign governments or institutions? We have been circulating a document, but I don't want to talk more about it here. We can go into the details of this, but we suggest we need to think about the media ecosystem as a European media grid, give it the same importance that we do energy, and build up an infrastructure that can allow us to have sovereignty, that can have autonomy, and that where the plurality and the diversity of opinion in the European media ecosystem can be a strength. This is not about creating a European BBC. This is about how do we collect all the diversity that is out there and put that together in a way where we can know and see the difference of how something is interpreted in Sweden versus Romania. Because in an era of rapid change, at least we are democratic societies in Europe, so I think we all believe in this, diversity of opinion is our biggest strength, because we do not know how the future will look like, and all collective intelligence shows that the more diverse, the more granular the opinion in a group, the better the new ideas were going to be. So how do we build a media ecosystem that will allow us to become that strength and to become that force? This is what we're talking about. If we do not fix the European media ecosystem, all our other things, we will have lost autonomy on everything else as well. So this is critical for Europe's survival. I hope we take this with as much importance as we think about defense, as we think about energy, and as we think about other critical infrastructures, because this is about protecting our minds. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for those who came in later, I mean, this fits perfectly because media, strengthening media ecosystems, making them resilient, it is actually what you said, industrial policy as much as defense, as much as industrial policy. So, and the second takeaway would be really reinventing this, reimagining this infrastructure is really critical, not just trying to catch up and copying what's elsewhere, but really thinking, how should this look like? What kind of values should be embedded? And how do we want to make sure that everyone has access and that we live in societies that are less polarized, because we need resilient societies to protect our democracies. Thank you, Erika. And I will hand over to Annette now, if that's that's okay, because she's taking notes here, so I wasn't really sure. Annette Novak is the former Director General of the Swedish Media Council, but moved into the tech space, right? And maybe you can talk a little bit more about what you're doing now, and yeah, contribute something to this debate and discuss what Erika said.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I moved into actually a research institute which focuses on user experiences, interaction design, so it's ICT and design. And I was also the head of the Swedish government's media inquiry for future media tools. So in a sense, I have both the news media background, policy development, and from a more legal technical perspective, and technology, which is not so many people in this. Usually I meet silos when I talk media. So either you talk to one of these groups. So that's me. And I apologize, I haven't been able to be here all these days. And I will also apologize, I didn't know I was supposed to make a little starting food for thought, but I will try, and you will bear with me that I will not be as eloquent as Erika was. But I think it's important now to think about where we are and where we come from, because internet in a way has died because AI has disrupted it, the way it functioned, all the basic functionalities. And we came from, I mean, early digitalization created this platform oligarchy that we're now trying to discuss how we're going to move beyond. And this, in a sense, also it was a US monopolization of a lot of basic functions of humans. We need archives. Google archived everything. It was the librarian also showing where we should go. And Microsoft, in a sense, was the secretarial assistant assisting us with our personal archives. Meta, Facebook, all these, the connector, maybe the identity builder, perhaps. Apple, access door. Amazon, infrastructure. You get where you understand where I'm coming from. So if we look at that and we think about how can we have all these functions in a totally different way in this new and emerging landscape, and I think that theoretically AI, it is the potential or the dawn anyway of some kind of post-platform society in my mind. But it could, of course, also go the other way around. This is the pivotal moment we are in at the moment. It could also be an emergency of a new era of total technological or market dominance. So this is where then the waters that we're navigating. And I think the important thing now is not to look at and try to regulate or discuss the current technology, because this moves so fast. So we need to look at where is the ball moving? Because when we will have whatever measures we wanted to implement, when we will have those in place, the technology will have moved somewhere else. So let's look where the ball is. And I think the future is not only American platforms, firstly. It's about Chinese platforms, for instance. We can see how extremely well they already manipulate our thoughts and feelings, and coming to Erika's point of keeping our minds. And they're doing that also to the most vulnerable of our citizens, our children. TikTok and other very well disseminated platforms we see research coming out of Taiwan, for instance, showing how children and teens have that are heavy TikTok users get them a very much more positive view of China. And so it's very sublime methods being used. And it's also about China moving up in the hierarchy of global value chains. It used to be the world's factory for low tech, maybe. In many people's minds, it still is. Anything from high-tech consumer goods to dominant technology in many sectors. But now it's advanced. I mean, they're doing advanced manufacturing. They are dominating on cloud, on compute, on AI, just to mention a few. So I think coming back to my point, it's not about AI only. It's about AI for what? What do we want to use it for? And Google search, coming back to the disruption, the indexed web page, which was the how we media function, how we media users search for information, it's no longer going to be it, because you're looking for information through the AI model UX prompt window. That's where you are. And we have now a full generation of children growing up searching information from that type of user experience. And this really means that the AI technology providers have come up very high in the value chain compared to earlier. And the race for dominant position there will just continue. The brands, when the prompt window is the experience, when you search for information, it means the media brands are totally not visible, meaning that we have a generation growing up not understanding that these brands, what they do, what they stand for. And this is kind of new, because we still measure, Reuters Institute and other, I mean, still measure, and we are all in the Nordics, we're very happy, we have very high trust in public service broadcast, for instance. But what I'm saying is, like, if we look ahead, we need to lift in this idea of what happens with this generation that doesn't have the relationship to these media. And I'm finalizing on this. So AI for what? Today's strong actors, they use it for control, for enrichment of the few, and to the detriment of the many, I would claim. And I will make a case that the EU can achieve edge by saying not AI for control, but AI for freedom, for individual and community empowerment. So a kind of new Ellis Island. It was attractive then. I think it can be attractive again, even if it's no longer in front of New York. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The new Ellis Island, Europe as the new Ellis Island. Maybe we can here in these wonderful settings imagine ourselves to be the new Ellis Island. And I mean, what you were actually saying is that we need some sort of equivalent to the current public media system that is actually very successful in countries where public service media are not state captured, but still quite independent. The Reuters Institute research just this week, the new digital news report came out, reflects again and again that public service media enjoy most of the trust of the general population. But then again, the structures are quite well shaped from the traditional view of how media need to work, but the public service media sort of infrastructure is decisive. And also what I also took away from what you said, and you just mentioned that sort of in passing, we need archives, we need a public record, because actually the thing with generative AI is like you can ask it in the morning and then you can prompt it in the morning and then do the same prompt in the evening and it will generate something completely different. So, and then if we have all these split audiences, what will actually be the public record of facts, the shared history that we rely on to learn from and to evolve in the future? And yeah, maybe that is something that Giovanni can respond to. I don't know.
I'm not Giovanni.
You're not Giovanni.
I'm Vasilis.
Sorry. Yeah.
No worries.
Sorry. Yeah, Vasilis. So maybe you can respond to that, Vasilis. You are from the European Policy Innovation Council, and yeah, maybe you have a few things to say about how you reimagine the public or the media system that is designed for public values in Europe, for Europe.
I will try my best. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the professor for the invite. And I'm very happy that I'm taking part to a very gender unbalanced panel, but with many experienced women. So I will try my best on my point of view. So I would like to stick and to dig deeply on the definitions that we use. We say from polarization to media's platform for problem solving. First of all, we have to ask ourselves why they are creating problems. Then why we say polarization in the media sector. Polarization, it comes when we have, let's say, discussions from the extremes sides. Polarization is practically the bad side of a fruitful discussion. That's the problem. So media, and then of course we have to define what we consider medias. Some years ago, medias were just the newspaper and maybe the TV. Now we are discussing about digital medias. So we're including also social medias in it. So practically, where I want to lead that our public sphere is fragmenting. We don't even share sometimes a common language of facts and meanings anymore. That's why we have also polarization, because of the lack of productive debates. So we can see that media's ecosystems have become tribalized. We can consider that the trust is declining, and we see that's why we see the rising of polarization and growing of public fatigue. But then that's what I would like to propose is that there are some solutions to solve these issues. For example, rebuild the epistemic commons, like public knowledge infrastructure, and then how also Mrs. Jasanoff called technologies of humility. Then I would like to ask all of you, how many of us, including me, we knew about the European Digital Media Observatory? You? 2? Anyone more? 3? 4? Why? So there are institutions, there are organisms that they are monitoring these situations, but at the end of the story, maybe they are not heard by the people. So media can lead, of course, a mass of people, but also the people have to know which are the structures that they can protect their sources of information. Another thing that I would like to say is that very crucial, very pivotal for the protection of the media is journalism. And we can see that the journalism can be created from professional journalists, but also from people that, for example, they have the knowledge to manage very well ChatGPT and to create articles. So which kind of information do we want? Just readable, deep information, or we want just to survive? So my point of view is that we have to see news that they inform and that not news that they are just products. That's why the society sometimes they change. It changes the mentality. Another thing that I can think would be very amazing if we could have implemented like a European platform for civic media resilience, practically a clearinghouse for civic tech tools, journalistic formats, and media literacy resources, a practically support mechanism for local and investigative journalism, particularly in underserved or vulnerable regions. And at the end, a collaborative research space engaging institutions like the Reuters Institute, as we all know, or such organizations. As a final remark, I would like to say that we cannot eliminate disagreement, and we shouldn't try, but we can create the conditions under which disagreement becomes productive rather than destructive. That is, in my view, is the next great frontier of democratic innovation, and media must be at the center of it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vasily. And you raised a really important question because it is obviously possible to construct platforms and all kinds of things to really produce or distribute credible information on. But how will people find out about it? And I'm still reminded of a movie that was by Kevin Costner, I think, and this was about baseball, and this was like about this field of dreams was the title, and it was like this guy believing like if he built baseball cards in the vastness of Montana, then all the famous baseball players will show up there. So if you and there was someone telling him, all like some greater spirit telling him like if you build it they will come. Very often this doesn't happen in the real world because people only come when they are attracted by something, actually to really get hooked on something, and this getting hooked is a process that involves manipulation and really manipulating people's minds. So this is actually the sort of this vicious circle we are in. And Francesca, I will ask you as the next of the final panelist here, Francesca Traldi from Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Italy, like the research director. Please, your input on how could we really reshape that media system?
Thank you so much. First of all, let me thank the organizer, in particular Professor Francesco Grillo, for having invited me, for inviting our foundation. It's a pleasure being here. It's an honor. It's a so inspiring conference. Thank you for having me also in this panel. It's a very important discuss with you and share my opinion with such a beautiful people. Back to your question, I totally agree with your statement. Communication is dealing with defense. And if we reflect on that, we have to admit that there is a very big change from the past. It's a sort of new paradigm. And that's why we introduced the Stratcom, the strategic communication in our field, which was something that we didn't do in the past. And we introduced this kind of new concept also in our target group, which is also quite a big change from the past. And that means that the change is coming. And as we really pointed out this morning in our previous panel on defense, the peaceful time or the peaceful era is at the moment over, and we are going to prepare the civil society to something new, to incoming new important challenges. And that is the first main challenge that we are facing on. And that's why we are talking about infrastructure. But before to discuss about how is important build up a new infrastructure, let me consider the value of communication in itself. And why we are going to talk about infrastructure? Because we lose the meaning of communication. And it's difficult today to reflect on which is a communication message and which is not. Because as it was pointed out also in our draft paper, the criteria are completely gone. I mean, and we have to restart to define them. And so in a era, as we wrote, made and marked by disinformation campaign, hate drive and manipulation, is still possible to define such a criteria and where we can start to describe them and to deliver a good message to the new young generation, which is our most important target group, as she was very well pointed out. How we can solve this kind of problem? Of course, not only with the regulation approach. Why? Because as it was already said, it's too slow method, and we have a too fast change, and also because the over-the-top system is too fast, and we cannot solve everything with a regulation approach, which is our best approach. I mean, we solve many problems, and we are the best in Europe and the world with this kind of method, but it's not everything good for this kind of battle. In this field, it doesn't work. So we have to find some new criteria and to discuss which is important to focus on new agenda and to redefine the priority on the communication before to deliver a message, before to find a way out to deliver them to the, also outside Europe, I mean. So
Okay.
I close with a big question. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. So let me open this in the panel, and then also I'd be happy in a few minutes to open this to the floor to every one of you if you have questions. My first question would be, and please feel free to jump in, everyone, except for it might be this question for Erika first. Who should do the building, the construction? Who should be responsible? How should we do that? That we need that sort of media hub that you were describing is really it's an interesting, exciting idea, but who should be at the helm of building it?
Well, I think what is interesting and the possibilities of AI, the debate often when you talk about media is freedom of speech versus, how can we control the quality of speech? That's where you always end up. And I think what the interesting thing is now you can create an infrastructure for media media is one of the most regulated industries in Europe. We already have the regulation. We don't need to add more things. But the problem is today we cannot assert or, the new actors are not playing by the rules because they're platforms and it has created a lot of gray areas. But with AI, what you can do is that you can create an infrastructure where all the diversity of media, whether you are a big public broadcast public service company or an individual YouTuber, you can connect into that. But if you do that, you have to abide by the media regulation, i.e. you can have the opinion you want, but you have to be able to fact check and you have to be able to do all the things that are already out there. Which means that if you don't want to do that, you can still have your opinion, it just won't be connected into the system. If this is then, and this can be an interconnected thing, it can be a stamp, there's lots of different ways you can think about, but that is the data on which any algorithm providing news has to be trained on in Europe. That means that this is the access to the audience. The biggest problem, one of the biggest problems in the digital media has been distribution of media. Who controls who gets what? We saw that when Elon Musk bought Twitter, now X, how everything suddenly changed. Reality looked very different on Twitter under Musk than pre-Musk. And once Musk started fighting with Donald Trump, it started looking different again. So that shows you the power that these things have. Who decides that is going to be key? And we cannot decide. I don't think it should be Europe. I don't think it should be a single institute who decides what you see. So, this is the reality we have. But you can today have that plurality. You can put the very diverse ecosystem that you have in Europe. And I like what you said with productive disagreement, but in a way where you get the information you need in a plurality and in a trusted way. So you have the public service, but you also have the individual podcasters or Twitterers, because journalism is also going to change during AI. But what the incentive is here is that if you want to be seen by anyone in Europe, you want to have access to that distribution channel, you have to behave in a certain way. You cannot be a troll, you cannot be all of a sudden you create a very different way of checking, which is not, you take away the question of freedom of opinion, so freedom of speech or not, because it's irrelevant. Europe is not trying to create the content, it's just creating a highway that delivers the content. But if you want to go on that highway, you need to have the right ticket.
Yep.
So it can change that fundamental debate that has blocked us for 20 years drastically. AI is a huge opportunity as well as threat.
Yeah, I like that highway metaphor. Like who should be building these highways? Because I mean, obviously we have a European highway system, but in every country you have your own system. You even have your own traffic rules. You need your own driver's license, sort of, if you settle somewhere. Who should be the building?
I think the reason why I came to the idea of the media grid because is really emphasizing and looking and comparing it to the energy grid, because the energy grid in Europe, yes, it's not been perfect. There's been a lot of problems, but it has this public-private. You have national things, a public-private. We can learn from the mistakes we did with the energy grid, so not saying this was the perfect system, but it has the elements of the fact that this should not be a purely European or purely single. You need these multiple elements, but you need public-private investment and you need certain senses of control and thinking of it as a critical infrastructure that we need to protect. But I see Annette.
Thank you so much, because the energy grid is also a very nice image to sort of explain this, because you have overflows and exchanges between the different grids, but you have still individual grids. Annette.
Just attached to what Erika was saying, because it's a very interesting metaphor. And I think there's part of the confusion when you discuss these topics, and I've been doing that for many decades now. It's that we tend to see, I mean, in the energy system, all actors are agreeing on something. We are creating energy here, and somebody's going to make some money, and somebody's going to use that energy. That's a joint understanding of what we're talking about. Whereas when it comes to media here, we have been wanting the new platforms, the new distributors, to act as the old landscape did, with the same purpose, which has never been the case. You know, they are not. We have wanted them to be what we think they are, public arenas for public discourse, for public good, but they define themselves differently during these years. In the beginning, remember, they were technology companies. Oh, they had nothing. Technology was neutral. Then that discourse moved a little bit. But they will always define themselves as is good for their business, for their turnover, for their profit margins. That's business people. So today, many of these companies will identify themselves as entertainment companies. So of course, this is very difficult when the regulator says you should be something else, and the private company says no, we are this. So that we will have to bring that with us when we think about the energy metaphor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's really what happened to many publishers when Facebook suddenly decided they wanted to deprioritize news, and then news wouldn't show up any longer in the algorithms. So that is really the danger. Like both of you, any ideas on who should be the construction, who should be at the helm here, who should have the initiative? Because we are into solutions here at this conference. Who should be doing this?
Well, who should be is a very big question, but on the perception of reality, I totally agree. It's different in the social media, and it's not only different the perception of reality, but also the perception of time. Time is totally different, and that's why we have to reclaiming the value of time in itself, like the value of communication itself, because we are pushed to build up day by day a new communication style, and there is no time to reflect on what is going on and to think and redefine, as I already said, the agenda, the priority. And without agenda, we are lost. And that is exactly what is happening now.
Okay. Yeah,
very shortly. First of all, on my point of view, I'm sorry that I will say it, but I see sometimes that we as Europeans, we are dramatizing the thing of the freedom of speech. Thanks God we have it. I mean, at least in the majority of the countries. Secondly, on who should be taking over this role, we have to be sure that in each country, when we are speaking about pan-European system, in each country, the profession of the journalism is being doing professionally. So once we grant this system, then we can decide who will be promoting officially the ways that the communication they have to go on. But let's stick and keep in mind that freedom of speech right now in the majority of the European countries there is. Just this, because we are getting very confused on this, and we want to be activists on this, but let's keep in mind this.
Yeah, there are very different perceptions of freedom of speech, and some kind. The American way is to say freedom of speech is that those who are the noisiest will prevail, and the rest, well, forget about it. In Europe, it's a much more nuanced approach, because much of the European public thinks that everyone needs to be able to raise their voice, and they need protection to be able to do so, and they need sort of protection from harassment, from anything, and not like the survival of the strongest. So there are very different perceptions to the freedom of speech. Because we started a little late, so I think we can run over a little late, but let me ask you, are there any questions in the audience right now? Yeah, please, Francesco back there. Is there a microphone for the? Is there a microphone? Yeah, but I don't know if someone is listening on Zoom, so that would be important to speak into a microphone, but there used to be someone with a microphone. Okay.
So I think this is one of the most interesting panels, because I think a lot of the problems that we discussed in the other panels are about the ability of institutions and various individuals and organizations to communicate with one another. It's a fundamental quality of the collective intelligence that actually is democracy. We cannot take decisions if we have not quality information. So you cannot have a functioning democracy if individuals have to rely on information that is not of high quality. So it's an existential threat. There's a difference between disinformation and information. The DMA, the DSA, and the DSCs in the national kind of applications. Europe has created a system to try to regulate disinformation and misinformation, or the blatant misuse of attacks or racism and whatnot. The real problem, someone mentioned time, I don't remember who of you mentioned time, is that the platforms are becoming more and more dominating the time consumption of biased information systems. The information per se are not disinformation or misinformation. It's simply a control of the agenda that hides any other problem. You can have a very important piece of information that is not blasted in the infosphere in the same way as absolutely trivial other information. So quality information is hidden because it's either rendered irrelevant or because forces are very good at blasting content that distracts. Now, you're media people and you're familiar, this is media since ever, basically, you know?
Yeah.
You have, look what is happening in the Gaza region and in Israel, and there's many ways of arguing about what is happening, right? Now, my question for you, but why do you seem reluctant to the idea of a public broadcasting service in Europe? Isn't it time for Europe to go back to public service?
Did anyone say that? That it was
Yeah,
someone?
I
mean, Erica was talking about public-private partnerships, but
Yeah.
but I was making a very strong case for a public service broadcaster. No.
All right.
Yeah.
Because for me, the sense I had that there was the need to create ways in which the national competition, which is necessary, because we want diverse voices. We don't want just one public service. We know what that means, right? But so somehow I was keen on the discourse that says you need to protect quality, professionalism, and competition of voices, no? But I also think that perhaps, well, I'm glad that we agree, but I think the solution of having, again, a public service might be a solution, because AI is offering the opportunity. Before, there was a cost. If you did one news item in French, then it would be only the French. But now with AI, you can translate it simultaneously, and you can have all the language in Europe. So what's your idea of a functioning public service?
Definitely, we need a new public service broadcasting infrastructure. Galina, I see you, but
I just wanted to say that the public service does have a lot of trust, but let's remember that 39% of Europeans today actively try to avoid news. 39%. Most young people don't really know what the website, their public service website is. They wouldn't go on there. So I think this is the point that we're trying to say. We're not saying this is not needed, but we have great public service. It's currently mostly national, but there are efforts to be done. But we need something in addition to that, because that is not enough. And in particular, when we're seeing this splitting into and polarization into different narrative communities, the narrative communities that are most affected by disinformation and conspiracy theories, that are most vulnerable to them, are the ones who are most, let's put it, distrusting of fact-checking, distrusting of traditional media, distrusting. So we need to create a system where, irrelevant of where you are on those spectrum, but that you feel that your voice and your perspective can be taken and is not taken. In the US, we don't have data in Europe for this because GDPR and other things. The information that is considered disinformation by official fact checkers in the US is perfectly mapped on the political scale. There is a problem there, and there's a reason why there is a lot of distrust. So that's why we're thinking, how do we create a pluralistic system, which is not about saying this. We already have fact checkers networks, but that's not enough. And we have a very interesting white paper, if you're interested on that, on the power of narratives, which is precisely arguing for a third dimension to the fight against disinformation, looking at meaning.
Thank you so much. Annette, you wanted to jump in on that, and then Galina with her question.
Just a quick comment on the public service comment. I think that one factor that speaks against it, I'm totally with everyone here, but I think it's important to look at all the things that, and we discussed. I mean, this is we're in information warfare era. We are in hybrid warfare era, where we have seen that the state actor, or when you have one actor, it's very vulnerable. When the autocrats move in, and unfortunately we are also in that era, they start by canceling public service. They defund it, or they sack all the management, or they do both. So if we build everything on that, I think that it's not going to be robust and resilient enough. So I would also like to throw in there a thought, and this is just a thought, what we could discuss also more moving forward. When that happens, it's civil society that's very important, and it's the pluralistic media landscape that's going to be more robust against such an attack. And when states do not want to fund from the national level because there's an autocratic government, perhaps, then regions and cities could be an option. They have, in France, it's regions that have money. In Sweden, where I come from, it's the local municipalities that has the money, the big money. In Norway, it's the regions that has the money. It's different. So that's why I'm saying regions and local cities. Maybe there's something there where you could create a buffer body, so there's no going to be any political involvement, but the funding should come from that. And that's a lot of actors, much more difficult to take out in a situation of information warfare. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. This is so important, the issue of state capture, and that it's really important to prevent state capture, because we have seen also in the US how fast things can change and erode. And just imagine there was a public broadcaster in the US, like a major one, like who would be leading this by now? Probably Elon Musk thought he would have something like a public broadcaster. But Galina, your question.
Two questions, but two real questions. So, question number one, yes, we are indeed in a time of information warfare. And of course, these actors now also access artificial intelligence for their information warfare. So how can we help or ensure that when they use AI and bots to multiply the noise and the bad data which is out there, is not really changing the entire narrative of those machines which are actually using AI. I think ChatGPT, Perplexity, and however they are called, because they arguably suck up all these bad data, and they then, if that is the majority of the data available, spill out more of the bad data. So over time, we will all become victims of our own, well, disinformation, if you wish. Yeah? So that's the first conundrum. How could we deal with that? And then the second, based on Annette's point on that Facebook, X, and the likes hide behind the fact that they're companies and they're only technical platforms. But the fact remains that they are publishers. Yeah, they are publishers. So how can we find ways of holding them accountable for the fact that they are, apart from being a company and commercially interested, they also have this public responsibility as a publisher?
Okay. Would you have any, or should I, or start?
The other side, the other side.
Do you have any responses to that?
Very quick remark,
Yeah,
if I may.
please.
I really liked your questions. The thing that I see is that first of all, there should be media literacy. It's very important.
Sorry?
Media literacy. And then the second thing that I think is the biggest fight of the human being with the technology is the fight with the algorithms. It's very unfortunate, but a very generic comment, but that's reality. As you said, if you log in, let's say in ChatGPT with your email, practically the algorithm is taking all your info. So is regenerating even the disinformation that you are getting.
Yeah.
That's a very quick remark.
Maybe I could respond to your question on information pollution. Actually, my view on this is that it's a huge opportunity actually for the media industry to really team up and make the case for trusted information and strike deals with the tech companies, because they actually rely on factual information being produced. There can be misinformation and stuff and distraction and whatever to a certain extent, but once the public realizes that something is completely offbeat and they can't really trust it, they will turn to media, which they did, for example, in the pandemic. During the 2020 Digital News Report showed, or the 21 Digital News Report showed that actually was really a hike in public trust in traditional media, because during the pandemic they didn't trust anyone else to really provide reliable information. And the platform companies, they probably realize that their stuff is useless and worthless if they don't have reliable information to back it up with for this. So there's an opportunity there. But Erika, you are.
I also wanted to add, I think they're very good questions. There will soon be, and it's already clear that there are two different lines of information, because the high quality AI is very expensive and only available to those who have, whether there's your company's paying for it or things, but it's starting at 200 a month, and that's not going to be. So it's going to become more and more evident that the clean, high-level information that will be available to those who are willing to pay, and the open, free one that is flooded by all these things, and God knows how they will find a business model, but that will happen. So I think this is very core, and this is where Europe can really show its strength, because if we can provide that which is very expensive for free. We saw that with healthcare. We see that with education. We're providing it for free for our citizens. It's a huge added value. And when you see how much it costs in the US or in China to have access to that, you also start evaluating how important information is and how why we're spending so much money on information.
Yeah, you wanted to add?
I can just add, I don't have an answer. It's very excellent questions, but I don't think anybody has the one size fits all answer to that. But I think there's two things that I would like to add. I totally agree with Erika here. It seems like we've been like preparing this, but we haven't. but the data, at the moment, I mean, we have seen studies claiming that about 57% of everything on the internet already is translated by AI. So this is happening as we speak, and it's massive. And when that happens, we have a lot of archives, and we talk about legacy media and being the trusted partner, etc. But legacy media also, disinformation finds itself into legacy media, and legacy media has CMS, content management systems, that automatically archive what they have published. And they don't distinguish. Most companies, there might be some exceptions out there, but the ones I've spoken to, they don't distinguish between this. So at the moment, we're also polluting the databases of our history that explained what happened, which is very scary and very worrying to me. So that's something that I want to evangelize everywhere where I am. But I also think there is something about, going back to your filter question, we have emphasized in the debate the discoverability question, because yes, there's a lot of things out there, and yes, there's power in the filter, of course, and we had the discoverability when we had cable. If we go back in media history and we look at how we did broadcast, how did we do when broadcast was disrupted by cable networks, we put public service must carry principle into the cable network. So we said, okay, you can have any channel you want, but you must carry BBC or whatever it was, and National or Public Radio or whatever it was, depending on the country. Why haven't we emphasized the idea of discoverability in these networks? When you're above a certain impact, there should be certain types of, we saw it in the pandemics, but it was like on the fly when the platforms realized, oh, we need to upgrade the national health institutes. But we could think the same way about trustworthy information, I think. And that goes also for individual people. And I think in this information overload era, which is just going to go bonkers now with AI, it is not only about the freedom of expression, because we have lots of expressions out there. It's maybe which some scientifics have been arguing for a long time. It's more about the right to be heard, which is linking to the discoverability question. Thank you.
I know you're holding the microphone, but please keep yourself really, really brief, like one sentence, because we need to come. We really need to come to an end.
Maybe. As you, Francesco, there is a short of liquidity here.
Okay, so is it working? Hi, how are you? Welcome all to this roundtable entitled "The 450 Billion Bet: How to Use Europe's Private Saving to Reboot Europe." Almost every panel these days will probably start with the same observation, which is Europe is at an existential crossroad. In a world shaped by war, technological competition, and growing geopolitical fragmentation, Europe needs to recover not just its ability to act, but also its legitimacy. Today, we're here to talk about economic tools, but let's not forget that every economic policy is, in the end, a political bet. Europe's economic strategy and its political identity go hand in hand. It's not a question of lacking resources. European citizens and companies hold more than 33 trillion euros in private capital across deposits, funds, financial assets, pensions, and corporate liquidity. And yet we face an annual investment gap of around 450 billion euros. So to explore this issue, I'm honored to welcome 5 outstanding speakers. So first of all, Romano Prodi, not 5 speakers because 2 of them are not here, I'm sorry. Romano Prodi, former president of the European Commission and former prime minister of Italy. Nice to have you here. Also, Marco Butti from Padua Schioppa, excuse my Italian, chair at the Robert Schuman Center at the European University Institute, former chief of staff to the EU Commissioner for Economy and former Director General for Economy and Financial Affairs at the European Commission, and also Rika Torpa, Deputy Head of Cabinet to the Commissioner for Financial Services and the Savings and Investments Union, and also Gregorio D'Empoli, who will do the introduction in a few minutes. So also, well, I let Gregorio take the word and then I'll continue, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Lilith. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to explain where this figure, 450 billion, come from. It's just an approximation of what is the difference between savings and investments every year in Europe. In other words, every year we Europeans invest 450 billions less than what we save. Bottom line, our savings go abroad to finance different investments and not European investments. On this purpose, the Commission tries to use Capital Market Union first, and now the Saving and Investment Union. We are very pleased to have the colleague working with the Commissioner Albuquerque, where the Saving and Investment Union has the purpose of matching much more than now savings and investment. Three key questions. The first one is the Capital Market Union or the Saving and Investment Union a real precondition for the development of European capital markets? Second question, is there a lack of capital, or there is a lack of investment opportunities in Europe, or we invest in sectors not very productive as, for example, the States? And the third, can we strengthen the European environment for private capital quicker than now? So let me start from the Capital Market Union. In the view of the Commission of European politicians, Capital Market Union is an enabling factor. But take into account that the EU economic system relies on the banking system for 70% of their financing. The same percentage in the States is only 30%. I will not go into detail as far as the fragmentation among the single capital markets, without mentioning the lack of strong private pension funds, equity investment funds, less developed in Europe than in the States. So the thesis is that a capital market union can reduce at least the cost of capital and increase the European global competitiveness. As a consequence, we need to move faster towards the CMU. It's not so easy because we have a lot of risks. To make a long story short, I'll mention just the headline. The first risk is that there is an uncertain political support, and this is not peculiar for the Capital Market Union. Some years ago, I met a high-level officer of the Commission, and I asked him, "Are you frustrated when something doesn't carry on?" And he said, no, it's normal. When we reach a stalemate situation, I put it into the drawer and I get another dossier. So I'm not lazy. I have always something to do. So political uncertainty, political support quite uncertain, long implementation time because it requires to eliminate structural barriers, and effects that we cannot see immediately. 4 empirical evidence on these topics. So the first one is that if we look at the financial accounts, outward financial flows are larger than inward. So we export savings. This is for the euro area as a whole in the different forms, direct investment and so on. Second evidence regards just Italy and shows the high level of diversification as far as the Italian households portfolio. A little bit less than 1 trillion is invested directly abroad, and a little less than another trillion is invested indirectly abroad, especially as far as the insurance companies which invest in other bonds and so on. And the same is true for mutual funds and so on. There are a lot of Luxembourg mutual funds, but that is in the statistic considered abroad of the country. One idea that I'm reading many times in newspapers is that in Europe we have 15, 16 trillion of bank deposits which are useless. But in a bank concentrated system, a wide part of these deposits are necessary for a loan to private sector. It's true, loans, the amount of loans is below that of deposit, but the difference is not so huge. The attractivity of the euro as a single currency is quite attractive. Now, the international use of the euro is stable around 19%. It can increase with the current weakness of the US dollar. Eurobond issued by non-European countries in the first months of 2025 is already equal to 100 billion euros. The point is that the euro area is not quite attractive for international capital. Here we have a lot of figures regarding the international role of the euro from different perspectives. I'll miss it, Lilith. A big question, is Europe investing too little? Yes or no? If we look at the ratio between the gross capital formation as a percentage of GDP, more or less we have the same figures here in comparison with the States. Where is the difference? The difference is in the quality, in the breakdown of the investments. Look at the green bars. That is the investment in intellectual property. The States is the double, more or less, than in Europe. Equipment is larger in the States. We have more or less precisely the same amount of investment regarding infrastructures, buildings, and so on, which are the less productive sector as far as GDP multiplier. More or less the same concept is here in this chart. The pink areas are investment in the automotive sector, huge investment in Europe, and in Europe we have a big crisis of the car sector. Whilst in the States, the light blue area is much more important. It's pharma on one hand, and on the other hand, software and computer services. I'll skip this for a reason of time. So what can we do? It seems to me that the Capital Market Union alone is not enough. It's rather an enabling factor. But however, its political feasibility in the short and medium term is debatable. So why not trying also more focused steps? Which ones? Private capital must be mobilized towards those segments which are more dynamic, such as innovation and investments by making Europe a place worth investing in. more focus to remove the current bottlenecks, such as the lack of venture capital investments and so on, and the over-regulation. We have to streamline, simplifying a lot what we have built up during this year. And of course, thinking, for example, of artificial intelligence, we have to increase capital flow towards high-tech and more disruptive projects than currently we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregorio De Felice. What kind of European planning do we need to better coordinate public and private investment? If we all agree that the Capital Markets Union is a priority, what should we actually do to make it work? And what should be our next priorities? I will leave the floor to each of you more or less for 10 minutes, starting with Mr. Buti.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. I have a view of about 45% of the audience being here. So, okay, good. It's a bit uncomfortable, but that's the way it is. So, no, nice presentation from Gregorio. Now, just maybe one or two comments on what you said. I think you showed very clearly the okay, now it is about 67%, so which is better. No, it's okay. It's okay. No, it's no problem. No problem. Okay, so now just one comment. Gregorio presented the aggregate figures for the EU, but I have done a study actually published a couple of weeks ago with a couple of colleagues, including Deborah Revoltella from the EIB. In fact, we used the figures from the investment survey of the EIB. Europe is not uniform. So if you look at within Europe and you separate continental countries, the Mediterranean, the Eastern European, and the Nordic, it is clear that the Nordic countries are the innovation hub of Europe. So if you look at the investment in innovative technologies compared to mature technologies, you see there they are clearly leading and they are competing with the US. So there are two explanations that we offer in the paper of why there is this difference within Europe. And the two explanations are: one, Nordic countries do not give more subsidies to enterprises, but they target it much more. They target it on innovative enterprises. So they help those who have a chance to develop and to invest in innovative technology. Second, they have a deeper capital markets. So they have more pension funds, institutional investors, so they convey more funds towards activities which are inevitably, let's say, long in ideas and short in collateral. So these are activities that normal banks do not normally finance. So I think there is a story within Europe also that I think can help foster the case for deeper capital markets and capital markets union. Now, I worked with President Juncker in my previous life, back exactly 10 years ago, when we conceived at the time the Capital Markets Union and also the name at the time. Then it has become Saving and Investment Union now. And, you know, this is 10 years ago. If you talk to leaders, you look at how many ECOFIN conclusions, conclusions of the European Council, op-eds of Commission President and Christine Lagarde and others, op-eds of commissioners and finance ministers, they all agree that capital markets, you know, is absolutely essential. So How come, in spite of the fact that also from the legal viewpoint, a lot has been done, how come it doesn't make a difference on the ground? And I think there are a number of explanations. As always, things are complex, but I think there are several explanations that are, I think they are more important for me than others. Okay, the usual explanation is that capital markets union is so complex that, you know, there are so many elements inside, so complicated projects, etc. Is this an explanation, a valid explanation for not making a difference on the ground? I doubt it. I mean, take the single market. Single market conceived back in 85. It had 400 directives. We have achieved that. You know, we are still working on it, but you know, it was it took off and was effective. The euro, was it less complicated than capital market euro? I don't believe so. So I think that cannot be the only or the main explanations. I think there is a political explanation. Everybody supports capital market union, but nobody owns it. I think there is no political ownership of capital markets union, really. If you look again at the big projects in the past, single market, I mean, the big push came from the UK at the time. Locke Cofield, do you remember that? You know, and Mrs. Thatcher. You go to the euro, there, I mean, the combination of, you know, President Mitterrand, Chancellor Kohl, in the context of German reunification, you know, with Delors, the triangle there, I think helped a lot. Capital markets union, I think everybody supports, but nobody really runs with that politically. So I think that there is an issue here. Now, other explanations, I think there is a strong opposition of vested interest. In reality, I mean, there is you look at national regulatory and supervisory authorities. You have major national market players, stock exchanges, market infrastructures. I think the asymmetric effects between countries. So some countries tend to attract more, you know, large enterprises, financial enterprise, through lighter regulation. So there is a competition there. I mean, and not to be belittled, also the position of large players, non-EU, could, you know, who could right now have more of a grip if you have divided Europe or not. So I think if we want really to make a difference, it is not just a question of, let's say, fixing things here and there, but you have to tackle these big problems head on. Now, how to go forward? If you take this analysis, this assessment here, that's my own personal one, it can be up to discussion, and then to go forward, what should you do? I think there are 5 steps that I would suggest very quickly. First, I think we have to change the narrative. I think it is clear that if we want to catch up on the technological frontier, if we want to play a role in the new, very fraught global governance, I think this is one of the chantiers to bring to fruition. So I think the relevance of the geopolitical and geostrategic relevance of saving and investment union has to be put forward in a very clear manner. I think the second thing I would do, I would put the capital on creating a single supervisor. For the moment, we have ESMA. It is a combination here of, you know, a rather weak central body with the participation of national supervisory. I think as we did for banking union with the SSM, I would go for a single supervisor. So that's my second thing. Institutions matters, and they make a difference more than rules. Third element, I think we are still in the long coda or the long shadow of the global financial crisis, where we, and rightly so, decided to go for a very risk-averse set of regulations. So, for instance, I think going there, reviewing the regulatory constraints for institutional investors to allow, I think, more risk-taking, I think would be the right thing to do. This is my third point. Now, my fourth point is accept to proceed with coalition of the willing. I think we can do that. As we were talking with Romano over lunch, Romano says this is valid for every area. It is valid here as well. You know? So I think proceeding with the coalition of the willing and getting people on board once we have left the station. Final point. I came yesterday afternoon. We had at the EUI yesterday François Villeroy de Gallo. He gave a lecture, the governor of the Bank of France, and he recalled a saying, which is the following: a plan or a project is a dream with a deadline. And so many times in the past, that's what we have done. I mean, it was 1992 for the single market, it was 1997, and then eventually 1999 for the single currency. I think we need to put deadline here for achieving what we want to achieve. If you look at the communication of the Commission on Saving and Investment Union, there are in each individual sessions, there are many, many deadlines. We do this in third quarter, fourth quarter, first quarter of 2026. I think this is input deadlines, but I think we need to have here an output, an outcome deadline. And I think that is usually looking at the dynamics of the negotiations in Europe, being clear on that front, I think helps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Buti. To Mrs. Torpa, maybe you can tell us more about savings and investments and the compromises and strategies of the Commission. Thank you.
With pleasure, thank you. And I have to admit that it's a bit of a tall order now to start talking about the Savings and Investments Union after the introduction of Marco. Very useful thoughts, they're extremely useful inputs, things that I will certainly report back on, and I hope you will hear that I'm actually talking to already some of those points now. So my focus indeed is on saying a few words about the Savings and Investments Union, and about the way that the communication that was adopted by the Commission in March contributes to this 450 billion bet that we're talking about here. So within this communication, the current Commission sets out a comprehensive and ambitious strategy that seeks to achieve two main objectives. One, to give opportunities to EU citizens to build their wealth by investing in capital markets. And then secondly, to mobilize savings for productive investments and strengthening of the EU competitiveness. The SIU aims to expand financial opportunities for citizens and businesses through a more integrated, efficient and EU-wide capital markets. So very much along the lines of what Marco has spoken about. So ultimately, the SIU seeks to help businesses access affordable capital, while in parallel offer investors, including retail investors, better opportunities so that they could grow their wealth and participate in Europe's economic future. And maybe here, just to draw some parallelisms between the Capital Markets Union strategy and the two action plans that have been adopted, I think what is really a difference in the Savings and Investment Union, that it brings the retail saver becoming an investor dimension in more concrete ways on board as well. So the SIU initiative, it builds on the past efforts under the Capital Markets Union and the Banking Union initiatives, which I think we can all admit have fallen short so far. And I also, as Marco referred to often, this is due to political divisions and very strong national interests. I think in current times, stakes are even higher than they have been before. And in light of today's geopolitical and economic challenges, we see the EU will really need to urgently move forward to ensure that there will be a steady flow of capital to finance the transition in the EU and to provide financing for critically important sectors in the EU. So in that context, I would say that the SIU focuses on three big needs. Firstly, we see that we need to make it easier for European savers to invest in the EU economy and to get more benefits from it. In this context, we are working on European blueprint for savings and investments accounts and on a financial literacy strategy. In the media panel early on, we talked about the importance of media literacy. I think we feel it's very much the same on having financial literacy so that we as citizens know on what we are investing on and what our realistic expectations are. We will also issue recommendations and legislative reforms to enhance supplementary pension systems across the EU. Secondly, we need a more and better financing for innovative European companies, not only in the north, but also all across the EU. So through this, the actions of the SIU will be addressing barriers for insurance, banks, pension funds to invest in equity. And we will leverage public funding through the EIB group and national promotional banks to do some de-risking in that domain. I think very much on the issues that one of the 5 points that Marco was mentioning. And just to show that we are already walking the talk, earlier this week, we made a proposal to review our regulatory framework to facilitate the use of securitization. So, and a third need that we seek to address is to incentivize investors to invest in European capital markets. And to do that, we have to also take a look at the supply side. The financial entities should also be able to offer their products and reach investors beyond their national borders. On paper, we do have a single market, also in financial services, but we are yet we still see tendencies of differing national rules, non-transparent price formation, issues with passporting, which I think in often the reality terms require a lot of visas at different levels. The recent IMF study indicated that the tariff equivalent of the remaining barriers in the financial markets in the EU, in the single market, is equivalent to about 100% tariff. And while we are busy negotiating tariffs with many external partners, these are actually tariff equivalent costs that we could negotiate among ourselves. To create a favorable environment, we have to continue to remove outstanding barriers to cross-border activities on capital markets. We will be taking steps to break down these barriers that make it hard for market infrastructures, asset managers, and investment funds to operate across borders. Marco has already touched upon this point as well, that by making it easier for financial market participants to grow across, we will need to create conditions for market-driven consolidation and scaling up. Through this, we can boost efficiency and lower cost, benefiting both businesses and citizens. But a functioning single market will also require consistent application of the EU single rule book by national supervisors. And I think there we see a lot of remaining challenges. The current supervisory tools are underused and they do face limitations. So under the SIU, we are considering to enhance existing supervisory convergence tools. We are also exploring shifting certain supervisory responsibilities from national to EU level, specifically critical infrastructures and major cross-border entities. We do realize that this is not an easy proposal to make, an easy proposal to swallow, but we are studying and we are determined to make balanced proposals on that front as well, despite the political challenges that it certainly will face. So with the goal, and this we will be doing with the goal to balance EU-wide oversight with national expertise and to ensure more efficient unified supervision that supports strategic EU priorities such as innovation and sustainability. So I think it is fair to admit that there's a lot of issues that we have to tackle, and we also recognize that they simply will not go away without us doing something about them. The critical mismatch of the 450 billion bet, of the savings and financing needs and the fragmentation in the capital markets, they both contribute to making EU a lot less competitive than our international counterparts, and they do deter European investors from investing into EU capital markets. So this is what the SIU is set to address. Our aim is not more regulation. We want simple and efficient markets. That can be beneficial for all users and service providers in the financial system. And we will build on existing good examples, and we will foster cooperation. And we do own on to the concept of the coalition of the willing. However, this would need to be done in a way that we are not creating additional barriers for others and the willing to join once we are showcasing the success on what this can be achieved. So compared to the past 2 CMU action plans and the initiatives under the banking union, the SIU also puts emphasis on actions that at member states level, particularly in the areas where EU has limited competencies. So for example, taxation, pensions, financial literacy. Here, these are areas where we as the Commission can issue recommendations. We can follow up the implementation of such recommendations through the European semester process, and we can also work together with the coalition of the willing to see on how to advance some of these reforms further. I think it's clear that the delivering on this SIU will need a buy-in from all stakeholders, from national authorities, from supervisors, from industry, civil society. It is a joint project. And I think that's why we find it extremely useful to have the opportunity to talk about it also in Pontignano. So thank you for having us here.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Torpa. And finally, Mr. Prodi, maybe some remarks about what has just been said. Also, if the problem is not the money and it's the lack of a shared bet, a common strategy, how do we use Europe private savings to reboot Europe?
Well, thank you. I think I have been invited because ignorant, this is my role today, because I am not an expert of finance. And so I shall expose my deep opinions about the problem of using our saving, but without the technical knowledge that I could learn today in this round table. First of all, I do think that the problem of how to use saving inside Europe, it depends upon the role of the euro in the world. I do remember when we were building the role. I shall never forget my meeting. I was Italian Prime Minister at that time with the Chinese President Jiang Zemin. In these bilateral meetings, you have a dossier like that. You talk about everything, and he was interested only in the euro. Nothing else. You couldn't talk about the relation between Italy and China, nothing, euro. And the question was, the old currency will disappear? Yes. Really, you will have a paper together? Yes. Well, the end of the story, can you think that we shall take our reserves in euro. And of course, at that time, the European GDP was 1 point under the US, was very similar. My answer was, okay, we are as important as US. And I said, I forget the answer. China will buy as in the reserve as many euro, as many dollars, because if side by side with the dollar, if there is the euro, there will be room for the renminbi. The idea of a pluralistic world in which Europe was the referees. And this was my dream in that time, you know. And they did it. They started to do it. And how we devastated it with the crisis in which Germany against Italy, Greece, crisis, they stopped to buy euro. And, you know, if you want to have the idea of your savings that are safe, that you must have a currency that is safe, sure, you know. And for a long time, euro didn't play this role. Now we have to be grateful to Mr. Trump because we can do it again. And in this moment, the first time after so many years that is a global discussion, I listen the idea that, look, euro can be back because of the uncertainty of the dollar. And so we have to exploit this situation. Of course, accompanying all what we listen among these wise men and women, you know, that say the problem of the fragmented capital markets, the problem of, you know, and we live now, and I join what Marco told, the strange situation that was underlined yesterday by the president of the Bundesbank, Nagel, who told, look, the central banks and the European central banks, they have done their duty. They are the government now that every day they delay the decision. And from the political point of view, I feel that this is the moment, you know. The same thing that the narrative of the real power Europe in trade, you know. And when I was teaching in China a few months ago, I was insisting that the Commission is, let's say, is the only decision maker. But back there are divided government, and so you know we are in the same situation of the fragmented financial policy, in which completely different from the period in which I was in charge. The government were pushing in that moment, and now they are a break for this union. So I do think that first of all there is a political duty. You know, BCA has made its duty, and the government they are not pushing enough for building this capital market. So there are all the technical aspects, but the first problem is a political decision. You know, it's you know, it's when a political decision sometimes has nothing to do with the technical aspect. You know, I do remember when we were really we were in the advanced phase of the euro. One day, the German industrial association did a communicate against the euro. The same, one day later, Helmut Kohl made a strong speech in favor of the euro. So I kept my telephone to Helmut, why your supporters were so against and you were so in favor? You know, the answer was, I want the euro because my brother died in the war. It's not an economic, it's a political issue. And so if we have not this situation in which there is a push for the unity of the financial market, we don't build that. But now we have the occasion of the unity because of the weakness of the dollar. Certainly, there are also many other points that look. Not I am not in the capacity of dealing with them, but clearly there is an attraction of the big tech American industry. There is also the control of all the world financial system. You know, everything is in the hands of the Americans. But this is a political issue. This is a political issue. This is not a technical issue, because clearly now we are not like at that time with the same GDP of the US, but they are 24% of GDP. We are 17, China 17, and so we are not out of the world system. The problem is that we export saving because we are not united and we have not the political will to do it. The uncertainty of the political support that is more important. Certainly, in terms of overconsumption, underconsumption, I find that we are just in the middle between China and the United States. And so I think that we are in the right position, you know, because China, they are under consumption. United States, they are overconsumption. Europe is in the middle. And so we have not, from the structural point of view, I speak, let's say, as an industrial economist, not a finance economist, we are, I think, in the correct position of the world, you know. So we have nothing to learn from others, but always going into the political aspect of it, you know, necessity of banking unions. But when, as in the recent situation, UniCredit made a bid on a German bank, and the answer was no, for national reason, maybe absolutely understandable. But this is an incredible message to the idea, how can you think of a European common capital market, banking union, when in the real terms you stop the possibility of having it without a doctrine. There is not a doctrine that we prefer small banks. The doctrine that we stop the mergers, the international mergers inside Europe. These are the very fragmented observation that I put in front of you. You know, certainly the problem to have, as is written in the letter report, that 300 billion euros every year migrate from Europe to US. This is such a damage that will make in danger also our economic development. You know, the idea that we can build around it a common, let's say, intelligence, artificial intelligence structure, or any type of common enterprise or common goal. This is what I think that without the political action that we must take. But I repeat, these are not in the hands of the central banks, not even in the hands of the fantastic experts that we are here around this table, but these are in the hands of the political rulers. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for your time and your interventions. Let's hear some questions from the public. Is this the moment, like Mr. Prodi just said? Who wants to take the word? Perfect. Do we need the micros?
Please speak loud, slow, and clear, because I speak English, but I don't understand English.
Yeah, just one observation that then leads to a question. The observation is that to the extent that the euro becomes a stronger global reserve currency, that would likely lead to an appreciation of the euro and therefore maybe even less investment in Europe. So we have to be a bit careful what we are wishing for. But more in general, I think the basic argument that also Letta has in its argument is that our current account surplus represents, so to speak, money that goes abroad, and we are losing it. Now, if this money goes, let's say, to the US and has excellent returns on the US stock markets, let's say 10% per annum, is that not better than keeping it here in Europe? At the macroeconomic level, if we look at the return of our investment here in Europe, all investment, not just financial, what's called the capital output ratio, then we have seen that additional investment in Europe has basically had a close to zero return. We have invested a lot in Europe, but the return has been very close to zero. So if you imagine we push 300 billion more into the same financial system, we'll probably get the same result, zero return. So I think before we can really show that we have a different financial system which yields higher returns, should we not be very careful for what we wish for? So keeping the 300 billion here instead of abroad, when investing abroad might lead a much higher return. Therefore, the question is, what is the sequence? First, reform our capital markets and our financial system so that returns are higher, and then, or the other way around.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can take two more questions, and I'm going to ask you to do short questions, please. Yeah. So we have time to have more questions. Thank you. Thanks.
Can you come closer, please? Thank you very much. Very quick question to the panel. Back in 2007 and 8, the level of cooperation in Europe and with the US to tackle the global financial crisis was extremely high, right? Then to cope with the COVID consequences, levels of cooperation were, I would say, a bit lower, but still very strong. Now it seems we have reached a historically low moment of cooperation across the Atlantic, but also within Europe. So how can strategies and financial strategies in the EU context be fostered so in this very new context, so that we can move out of this historic low of cooperation both within Europe, but also in a transatlantic way, and can cooperation with emerging powers, emerging countries, help tackle a number of the negative issues you have been describing. Thank you very much.
Last question, maybe? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your thoughts. I like to disagree with Daniel every time I see him in a conference. So I try to formulate the question a different way. I remember back in the Eurozone debt crisis, like the mantra was that we have to be exporters, like we have to export more. This was the model for Europe, an export-led growth model. I don't think this is anymore possible. Like we're losing ground from technological competition, both from China and the US. So if we do keep this 450 billion in Europe for investment, what kind of business model do we want to have?
I also have a small question, Gregorio. Because one very small question on my side. I was rather surprised by one single number. If we consider the stock of wealth of a country like Italy, basically the indirect diversification is made for 40% by one single institutional investor, which is called insurance. Now, I'm not asking you some comment on the Generali thing, taking advantage of Monte Paschi Siena not being here, but does this thing change a little bit the entire strategy? Because it is a problem, but it looks like it is rather concentrated, if it is a problem, like Daniel was saying.
Maybe same order. So Mr. De Felice starts, then Mr. Buti, then Mrs. Torba. Yes.
So a lot of questions. I'm not sure I have understood everything because there is an echo. There is an echo in the room, which is not so easy. The question regarding the business model exports is clear that we reached how can I say, a peak in terms of percentage of exports as a percentage of GDP, let me say so. The point is that domestic demand remains weak. And so many entrepreneurs tried to change their products, moving towards medium to high quality to export abroad, because that is the only way to survive. What I'm implicitly trying to say is that if we invest more to keep the competitiveness of Europe, not in terms of market share of exports, but in terms of prospects in the high, what we have done years ago, 15 to 20 years ago, which was abandoning the low quality products because the competition from China was so strong that we could only lose. Now we have to do a further step towards very high products, very high tech products. And this is the way we can allow to have salary increases in Italy, as in Germany, France, and so on, to accommodate, to have a more balanced breakdown between what we sell abroad and what we sell within the European Union. Francesco, I'm cherry picking in answering also. Francesco, what you said, you have been surprised by the figures regarding the role of insurance companies which invest abroad the country. Take into account that there is also investment in Bund or AT, so investments in not Italian treasuries, but they can be European at least. So I believe that savings is one of the big strengths of Europe. The US do not have savings. For years and years, they had negative savings. And they they consumed above their affordability, above what they could. So now Mr. Trump woke up, asked for an emergency status, and the Court of International Trade told him, what emergency? It's at least 20 years that the states have a commercial deficit, a trade deficit with the rest of the world, China and Europe especially.
Okay. Yes, I think Odysseus' question is the answer to Daniel once.
Very sneaky.
So I think on the that's precisely the point. I mean, you have a bit the Mar-a-Lago doctrine in reverse. You know, they worry there of international role of the dollar, which would lead to a constant appreciation, excess appreciation. So you now say that we would have to, in a sense, if you claim a more important role worldwide, we'll have to worry about the same thing. I think I'm not worried at all about a trend appreciation of the euro, precisely because we need to have to change our production model and our business and our growth model. I mean, we have to move from export-led growth model to something which is more indigenous. So a rotational demand which goes hand in hand with an appreciation of the currency doesn't bother me at all. In fact, it is consistent with the need to reorient the growth model. Now, the second point, Daniel, that you have on the rate of return, yes, I mean that's I think is a very good point. But that's why we have to pursue all the other avenues that we have discussed also these 2 days here to increase the potential rate of return of investing in Europe, and all the other things that we discussed, I think, should be conducive to that. Now, let me just finish on one point, which is on stock of wealth, but not to answer your question, Francesco, but to make a point of doctrine. I have been raised in the old Keynesian frame of mind, and I think the saving and investment union is more appealing than capital markets union as a terminology, but we have to be careful here in the way we look at things. Because, I mean, for me, the arrow goes from investment to saving, not the other way around. So basically, we have to keep the target in mobilizing the stock of wealth, not care so much about the flow saving. So mobilize the stock of wealth. Yes, we have plenty in Europe, plenty in Italy also, and mobilize it towards creating the conditions to then boost investment from that front. And if we do that, then saving would decrease because we invest more, and that's I think is the right way of looking at the issue.
I'm very aware of time here. I heard the 6:30 departure for the panel after us. So maybe I'll just make two quick points here. Firstly, related to the rate of returns, I think Marco already also mentioned that. I think from the SIU perspective, we really see it as a strategy that is sector neutral and geographically neutral. So you will not be seeing from us proposals that will have very strong recommendations or let alone restrictions on who to invest and where to invest sectors geographically. And I think there is, so we see it really as an enabler. It's part of the wider roadmap of tools and policies of the current Commission's mandate, and it is very much of the enabler of the overall competitiveness agenda. So I don't think we can talk about a chicken and an egg situation, but it's more of a horizontal enabler that will be one of the key elements that will help in improving European competitiveness with bringing down cost of financing, because all of these barriers in place actually do constitute to hindrance for investments to move into productive targets, and those productive targets actually being yielding high returns similar to those what the investors get on the US market. Then maybe a second point I'll quickly make relates to potential diversification of our international partners. This is certainly also very much on the agenda of the current Commission. We are very, I mean, I do almost pity colleagues who are responsible for the trade agenda at the moment, because they are very busy negotiating with many other jurisdictions at the moment. And as part of that process, of course, we are also looking at the possibilities of widening our partnership in the financial services sectors. Thanks.
Well, I take only one point. I am personally not worried of the appreciation of the potential appreciation of the euro, because the structure of American industry is so, let's say, in terms of cost or in terms of technological progress, so low compared to the European one that Trump will never succeed to make it more dynamic, except the high tech in which they dominate. So there are some sort of two different fields. Our problem is China. This is really how we deal with China, because when we talk about the third markets, 20 years ago, they were, let us suppose that there are 200 countries in the world. They were 100 in 2004. There were 150 countries trading more with US than with China. Now there are 150 countries trading more with China than with the United States. Only Europe is trading more with United States than Europe and Canada and Mexico, and Mexico is changing very few countries. So the problem is not euro dollar from that, is how we deal with China. This is the real problem, because China is so different from very few years ago. They are technologically advanced in any field, you know, they're dominating in the new mass market, white, brown, all the new devices, everything, you know. So this is the problem. And I don't see any European strategy with that, you know. I was in China in the last 2 months, and they are disoriented, you know, because when Trump started with the idea, America alone, let's say the first phase, we mean America, or the Chinese of the Beijing University, they were telling, look, now we must make an agreement, Europe, China, and so on, and so on, and so on. Then when Trump has, let's say, done a delay to Europe, the Chinese say, but you Europeans are with him or with us? Take a decision, because we don't understand what we are doing. And now the third phase is that Trump is dealing more with China than with us because of the rare earth. So clearly the problem is, which is our policy? This is not only with China, because, and we are, from this point of view, in a strong position because they need the European market. They need a lot now, European market. And so we should make a comprehensive agreement with China, as Angela Merkel tried to do in 2020, with also some relation with the third world, with the other countries, with the idea of an entire deal. But if nobody knows whether we take a position with Trump or or against it, we are really in a strange situation now. This is my point. It's not the problem of the revaluation of the euro, because I repeat, from this point of view, Europe is very strong. In the middle technology, we are strong. We are strong. Thank you.
Okay. All right, if you are staying, please do sit down. Yeah. Welcome everybody to this fine, thank you. Welcome everyone to this final plenary of the day. As you can see, we've got a fantastic all-women panel to close out the session. I'm Gemma Ware from The Conversation, and in this session, we're bringing this central issue of climate change very close to home. We'll be talking about engaging citizens in the energy transition through the case of affordable and sustainable housing through renovation. So a rapid energy transition is essential to avoid catastrophic climate change, but that transition needs to be a just one, which is supported by the people it affects the most, with its benefits shared equitably across society. And this is a real challenge for politicians and policymakers around the world, and of course Europe is no different. And it's an issue that touches on some of the questions that we've been covering throughout this conference: industrial strategy, finance, democracy, democratic questions. And we're going to be starting off by a presentation from Taube van Melkebeke, who's the head of policy at the Green European Foundation, a political foundation which strives to maintain discussions on European policies and politics both within and beyond the Green political family. So Taube, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Gemma, and thank you everyone for sticking around. We're both the closing act and the graveyard shift today, and we're very happy to see still some faces. A big thank you also to Francesco, but also to Sarah, Silvia, and Valerio for the great day and the conference organizing it. It's really, again, a big success. I've been happy to attend this as a second timer. I was here as well last year. And last year, much like today, we were also talking about putting people at the heart of the EU's energy transition. And at the Green European Foundation, we've done a lot of work on that. We also have some publications at the entrance that look like that if you want to read more. And we're very happy to be here today as well with an excellent panel to discuss these very pertinent issues. Last time we already discussed the importance of the topic given the current context at that time, but I think it's very safe to say that the stakes have even become much higher. So 2024 was the hottest year on record. We have seen a lot of climate damage, emergency, disruption of people's lives, as well as of infrastructure and economic losses. But what we've also seen in the last year is very much the impact of Europe being still very much reliant on fossil fuels, and how that impact can be detrimental for economic circumstances, geopolitically, as well as security-wise. All of this to say that an accelerated energy transition is not just about delivering the EU's climate commitments, but that it's very much our best strategy for long-term resilience, long-term security, healthy people, quality of jobs, and a thriving economy. And it's also people that actually define whether we can make that acceleration happen, right? It's people who learn new skills, it's people who take new jobs, and it's also people who renovate their homes. But maybe even more importantly, it's also people who define the political space for policymakers to push for that acceleration. And we see that there, specifically there, I think we have seen bottlenecks and barriers in the last couple of years. Despite my previous pitch on the long-term benefits of this accelerated transition, sometimes the upfront costs have not been taken enough into account. And we feel, or we see also that not everyone finds a way into the narrative of the transition and finds themselves being somewhat left behind. Why is that happening? I think it's a very complex picture. I think part of it is that the energy transition and policy making around it have very often remained technocratic affairs, seemingly opaque for the rest of the people that are not working on the topic. Secondly, I think these upfront costs versus long-term benefits are not taken enough into account. I think we sometimes go too easily over that, and we don't plan enough how to deal with those upfront costs, but we also don't, I think, show enough what these long-term benefits can be. It's not just about affordability of your energy bills. It's also about healthier, less polluted cities. It's also about democracy, potentially, right? You can create energy systems that are much more democratic than the ones that we've gotten used to through fossil fuels. And finally, I think there's also a very important factor in the siloed policy making. We see that energy transition ministries and policy units are often very much disconnected with labor and employment affairs, as well as with budgetary and economic governance agencies. And one area where we see these issues very pertinently, and where we see also that there's still a very big gap between the commitments and the necessities, and where we are today, is the building and housing sector. Just to give some numbers, buildings in Europe account for 40% of energy use and 38% of emissions. And when we look at how the renovation of buildings is going, we can safely say that it's very slow. There's 85% of buildings in Europe that date from before 2000, and 75% of those buildings are very poor in energy performance. And then maybe even also very importantly, the investment gap that we see on delivering climate commitments is huge. We know that, but the share of renovation or the deficit in renovation financing is 1/3 of the total investment gap. There was just a report out by the Institute for Climate Economics, a French think tank, who have clear numbers about that being 1/3 of the total deficit that we see today. And to make it even more complex, the baseline scenario is also difficult. We still have 1 out of 10 people in Europe facing energy poverty. And we also see that affordability of homes, being that for renters, but also for buyers, is at an all-time low. Which is why, I'm sorry to paint a little bit of a bleak picture at the end of the day, but I think we're gonna also go more positive now. which is why it's both very important and like, it's critical to connect the affordability, the people-centered thinking, and the inclusivity of the transition with housing issues. So you cannot build affordable housing without energy transition. You cannot do the energy transition without affordable housing. And we have some opportunities there at the EU. We have in the last legislative term, the EU changed the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is really a key file to bring member states on board to put or make member states take action in renovating homes of citizens, in making also sure that that happens in a way that there's social safeguards taken into account, and in basically also having a whole of EU approach to having more sustainable housing and decarbonized building stock. And then later, or no, not later this year, but next year, we have an affordable housing plan coming up, which is actually coming from the Commissioner of Energy and Housing. This is the first time that we have a commissioner that combines those two portfolios. And to me, that's very important. And that showcases also that there is thinking being done at the EU level to make leaps forward into connecting those very important and interconnected issues. So it's a key moment to deliver, and we have experts here from different countries working on different levels of the issue, and I'm very, very curious and excited to hear what they have to say, and I also hope that we will have some discussion with all of you in the audience at the end of the session, I guess. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Toby. I think that point that buildings are responsible for 40% of the EU's energy consumption and nearly 40% of greenhouse gas emissions just really puts it into perspective how big an issue this is, and perhaps how under the radar it is in terms of the discussions. I'm going to invite my panel from right to left to offer some remarks on your paper and what you just said. So let's start with you, Jessie. So Jessie Scott is Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation and adjunct faculty at the Hertie School and at DIW Berlin German Economics Research Institute. And I understand you're based not too far away from here in Tuscany. So Jessie, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Taube. So we find ourselves with the climate and energy discussion last on the agenda. That's a familiar feeling from the past. One thing before we turn to housing, colleagues and friends at Bruegel recently ran a big opinion survey about what European citizens think of the climate challenge and of the priorities around climate action. They were expecting to discover that maybe in different countries there were different levels of priority, different age groups, different economic income categories, all the things you might look for. They in fact found that there is strong support for climate action, with the exception of one group in European society, and that's people who have lost confidence in government. That is the common denominator of people who say, let's not bother with this, or we don't want this to impinge on other choices. Essentially, if you don't think that governments can deal with holes in the road, you don't think that governments can deal with climate change. If you do have some confidence and belief in government left, you want action on climate change. Housing. Clearly, the building stock in Europe cannot be dealt with entirely through either EU-level policies, although I was appalled to see in your paper that the most recent heating and cooling strategy comprehensively was 2016. So it's a good thing the Commissioner coming out with something new soon. And the reason we can't do it all at EU level is, of course, that there's an enormous diversity in the building stock around Europe. And if you look at the data for the 200 million households in Europe, it's not just the building stock, but of course the types of households, employed, unemployed, children, etc. So there's good reason for subsidiarity when you look at buildings, building performance, and some of the measures to drive change, particularly in the retrofit of the historic stock. I think there are some things we could look to the EU to do. A key one is, of course, the upfront finance, as you mentioned. That's a big issue whether you're doing heat grids. Geothermal is clearly one of the most sensible things that we can do in urban heat environments, but it is very expensive to build. Once you have it, it's incredibly low cost to operate. So long story short, rich cities are doing this, Malmö, Munich, and poor cities where there is public finance, Charleroi. If you can do it with the finance as a city, you go for it. We get very little mention of this at national or at EU level. But the other aspect of upfront finance is individual building heat. And it's now maybe 5 or 6 years ago that I heard the statistic that stuck most in my mind on EU policy in the whole of the energy transition. And it's this. You mentioned 1 in 10 people in Europe live in energy poverty. I'll come back to what energy poverty is in a moment. That's the same case also in the Netherlands, which is at one level appalling. This is one of the richest countries on earth, and 10% of people struggle paying their energy bills at the end of the week or the month. But broadly, that's a manageable social phenomenon. 48% of the population of the Netherlands, and I suspect it's even higher for the whole of Europe, live in a different category of energy trap. They can pay their bills, but they can't afford to invest in alternative energy technologies, insulation, new windows, etc. How do we finance that? I would like to see the EU looking at, for example, loans for real estate transactions. How should I be allowed to have a mortgage from a bank which doesn't include an obligation to take the money and invest in a retrofit of the building to the appropriate standard for that building? I don't see banks offering this, but I do see room for a discussion about how banks should be obliged to offer this. Don't take me further into banking because it's not my field, but really there are opportunities to look beyond the traditional energy toolkit to really address the costs dimension. A couple of remarks on energy poverty. As Claude Turmes used to say, and still does say, there's no such thing as energy poverty. Poverty is poverty. If you're poor for your energy bills, you're poor for food, you're poor for transport, you're poor for housing. And I think this is really important when we look at the politics of what we're talking about here. 2/3 of greenhouse gas mitigation involves some behavior change by people. All the stuff the politicians want to work on, the grids, this is relatively invisible, relatively little impact on lifestyles, relatively little impact, therefore, on public politics. Housing, food, transport. Here you are getting into a very different political sphere. So we all remember the Gilets jaunes. What was going on there was not just a protest against a diesel tax. It was a protest against people not being able to afford to live in the cities where they worked, and therefore having to drive long distances, which meant that the diesel tax was going to have a very significant impact on the people who couldn't afford to live near their jobs. Essentially, it was a cost of housing crisis manifest through a policy that was the straw that broke the camel's back. When we look at the politics, housing is very personal, very individual. You need to give people confidence that you are not going to keep asking for changes. One of the things that went wrong in the debate about the German heat law, which I watched closely over the last 5 years, was people felt they'd been asked to change from oil to gas, and now they were being asked to change from gas to something else, and what would be next? So some sort of clarity about the landing point is a key concern. The other element is, of course, that we're talking about a set of policies where it's much easier to convert your housing if you own it, if it's an independent unit with its own rooftop, etc., etc. In other words, if you live in rental accommodation, if you live in apartment blocks, the way we are designing the market rules, a lot of the financing, a lot of the technical specifications around the energy transition essentially makes it a middle-class activity. Much harder to access if you are in a different kind of housing. I know I've got a Polish colleague on the platform here, so one last quick remark. 200 million households in Europe, of whom 14.5 million are in Poland. Poland is a very interesting case study because in many ways it's the worst. There is still coal in household heating. There are still solid fuel boilers in which, well, pretty much anything you can imagine is being burned. And it's also the great success story for the deployment of rooftop solar at enormous speed and for the deployment of air source heat pumps over the last couple of years. Of those 14.5 million households, about 1.2 million have rooftop PV, and that has been achieved over the last 5 years. It's about 15% of electricity generation capacity in Poland at the moment, gone up from 1% back in 2018. The PV market in Poland is about a 5 billion turnover. And we have seen, of course, a return on investment be the driver for this. You get a return on your investment in your solar rooftop in Poland in about 4 years. So we can get this right. We need to get it right in slightly different ways in different countries, but fundamentally, this should have been a topic of the previous panel because ultimately it connects back to the financing, and a lot of that will have to be private finance because there is no way that the public purse can cover 48% of people in an energy trap. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessie. We'll get on to some of those questions about Poland, I'm sure, with you, Liliana. But first, let's go to Paz Serra Portillo, who's a member of the regional parliament of Madrid for the Verdes Equo party in Spain. And we're interested to hear some of your views on this energy trap and what it's like at a local level from your perspective.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you for the organizers for having invited me to speak to you here. I'm very happy to be here, even if it is the last panel. And I'm very passionate about boosting energy transition and getting people involved, because I think it's key if we want to have a rapid transition. And I think what is different from energy retrofitting of homes to the installing of solar PV, for example, it's the cost and the fact that it affects homes of the people. So it's a very difficult decision to make, even if you have all the rational elements to make it. You still have to have the time, you still have to find installers, you still have to go through a path to kind of get started, and then it takes time. It's not an instant change. It sometimes can take months to have houses refurnished. And Jessie was talking about some of the obstacles and things, and I think Spain is a great example for many of the obstacles to energy retrofitting of homes. Like, for example, in Madrid, where I'm from, 99% of people live in apartment buildings, which makes it harder to implement. And then there is a spike in housing crisis in Spain. I mean, median income in Spain, it's now at 1.5 thousand euro, and medium rental for an 80 square meter apartment, so not very big, it's 1.15 thousand. So you have very little money to invest in energy transition whatsoever, and it's not only the case for lower class households, it's now the case for a vast majority of Spaniards. So people are struggling to get access to housing. And so when they finally access it, the quality of it or the state it is in doesn't matter as much. What matters is to have a roof over your head right now. So it's a very difficult obstacle to go through, because it is a true problem. And even if you look at green mortgages and offers by banks, people are not taking them because it's an extra cost to the already very high cost of having a mortgage. So you really need to make it mandatory, or to have policy backing this up, so that it is not a decision, but it is something that is implemented as a whole in society. And there is a second obstacle that I think is, I used to work at a consumer organization before taking office, and we ran a survey 3 years ago, which was when the next generation funding were at its highest level in Spain, and 2/3 of Spaniards didn't know of any funding schemes that were available to fund energy transition. So, and that was at the highest point of all the funding possible was then accessible. So now, if you have 2/3 of Spaniards that don't know, of course, there are many things that need to be done. and this adds on top of the cost of living crisis and the gap and the risk for an energy gap. So right now in Spain as a whole, but mostly in some regions, and Madrid is one of them, we are seeing that the energy transition funding is going to higher income households because they are the ones that in Spain live in individual houses. So it's easier for them to retrofit their house, but also to install solar panels. So there is a real risk for an energy gap where the higher income households have access to the benefits of energy transition, and then the middle and lower income households are left aside. And so energy poverty and poverty itself can run very fast in the upcoming years. But you also mentioned this the concept of not constantly asking for people for new things, and that's key. I mean, and here we see how the polarized landscape in I think it's in all Europe, but in Spain it's working because we have the national government who has undertaken energy transition as one of their main priorities, which clearly stated since the beginning of European funding that no funding should go to fossil fuel technologies like boilers or so on and so forth. And then you have regional governments, and you have the Madrid region, which is still funding today gas boilers. So people are now buying newer, more efficient gas boilers. And how do we tell them now that they need to change to heat pumps? It's still very difficult, and maybe I think that the fact that there is this mismatch between the EU level policies and then the national policies and then the regional policies, this causes confusion, and it's very easy to not see change because you are listening to the, I don't know, in Spain, I'm talking about Spain right now, but you're listening to the president saying, okay, so we are going forward in the energy transition, and then you don't have anything to back up in your for citizens to get attached to it, and then so there's a concern about the sustainability of these policies right now. In Madrid, 100% of funding to energy transition comes from EU funds. What will happen when EU funds are not available? We don't know. I mean, it will go to zero. So still, we need to make sure at the European level we have the mechanisms to ensure that the priorities set at the EU level are going through all the levels, through national, through regional, to ensure that these priorities reach the citizens. And yeah, I agree with the fact that upfront investment is very important, and I also agree with the fact that social and economic criteria should be taken into account when allocating funding, so that we don't see this energy gap I was talking about. And on the last point, and since we are here in Italy and it's very hot today, I think you will understand. I think it is long past time that we consider cooling also at the heart of energy efficiency policies. Because even in countries like Spain, heating has long been observed as a basic need, but cooling is still dismissed as a luxury. And I think that, for example, if we want to make the case for heat pumps in places like Spain, where district heating is not as developed as in other countries, one of the points we can work on is the fact that it works for both heating and cooling, and that could boost the installing of them. And then in the end, it's just, I think energy retrofitting is a very fascinating thing. I've been working on it since the drafting of the EPBD, the European Performance of Building Directive. And but it involves so many actors, and every one of them has to be on board, from policymakers to installers to consumers to citizens. Everyone should be involved, because if not, you get lost in the middle.
Thank you, Paz. And I think that point about cooling is really important, as you say, in where we are today in Siena being so hot, but also it kind of ties back to that point you were making about the transition not just being for the richest of households. You can't just have the richest of households being cool and hot in the prospective parts of the year. It has to be just to be everybody. Liliana Smik is our third panelist. She's the chairwoman of the Foundation for the Council at Warsaw Institute, a Polish think tank. And she's also Director General for International Affairs at Ludwika University of Public Services. And I think you're both based in between Poland and Hungary. So interesting to hear your perspectives from both those places.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Honestly, I'm quite surprised because I thought we will have like heated debate, but probably I agree with you with most of the things that you said. So I thought it will be more like a heated one, but no. But let me just maybe start with the fact, because I didn't realize it yesterday when I was sitting here, that we were sitting in a very, first of all, interesting building and in a very interesting room. So maybe it says that there is some kind of a revival to Christianity and Christian values like love, compassion, humility, integrity, and forgiveness. So that's an interesting point that we are meeting exactly here. And I just would like to go back to actually the previous panel discussion. And one of you already mentioned it. One of the speakers said that China is a problem. And honestly, I think rather it's us who are at the moment a problem, because I think it's quite dangerous to state that certain trade partner is a problem if we know that in Europe, Chinese companies provide around 90% of the supply of the solar photovoltaic modules. So our whole energy transition actually depends on this partner. 30% of the batteries in electric vehicles sold in the EU in 2023 were also done by the Chinese companies. And 98% of the EU demand for rare earth materials are also satisfied by China. So at this moment, where we all agreed for all of the governments agreed for this climate policy, I think it's quite dangerous to make such statements, because without China at this moment, we won't be able to satisfy any of the goals that we put on our agenda. And now going to the paper that you have prepared, I think it's very interesting, and I think it's great because it challenges the narrative that citizens are turning away from the energy transition, which I think is not true. I think citizens actually care. They want to be part of it. But what they care more is whether these policies actually works for them. Whether actually they will have the access to affordable and reliable energy. And I think they want to be a part of it, but they want to see whether it works or not. And at this moment, it doesn't really work. And let me go now to the Polish example, because it was mentioned a couple of times. Even though Poland is economic miracle in a way, because our GDP is growing constantly since more than 20 years. Still, we did some research in Warsaw Institute with the researchers from a couple of universities in Poland, and it actually says that around 20% of the Polish households are in danger of the energy poverty. So 1 in 5 of the Polish households cannot make their houses warm in winter. And there will be this additional element that you mentioned, that in summer, they won't be able to make their houses cold, because we will be also struggling. I know that Spain is struggling with it in a different, let's say, manner, but it will be us as well in the very near future. We were checking the patterns. Why is it like this? who are actually the ones who are living in this household. And what we notice is that actually the biggest amount of the people who are in this group of the most vulnerable ones are single women who are alone because either their husbands or partners they died and kids moved out, and now they are stuck in a huge apartments, very often in city centers that have very bad quality windows. The houses are not warm enough. So that's one of the problems that we are experiencing in Poland. Another issue that we should, I think, discuss is that there is no one size fits all solution. So Central Eastern Europe, we have different historical experiences. We are not starting from the same point, for example, as our French colleagues in the European Union. So I would encourage those who very often are pushing, those who are not up to date with certain milestones on the agenda, that we are not starting from the very same point. And if we are questioning, it doesn't mean that we are climate deniers. I think no one is actually denying that climate change is a scientific fact. The problem is that we cannot be on the same level as our colleagues from Western Europe. And another issue that I would like to add to the agenda is rather about less messaging and more listening. I think we need less of a communication strategy and more of reality checks, because of course we can propose, well, with politicians, they can promise everything. They can promise everything, especially in the campaign period. But maybe before we actually propose certain policies, we should calculate how much it will cost and whether we will be able to afford it. Because if we look at the current data and how much it will cost us to achieve the net zero, it will be between 1.5 trillion euros per year between 2031 and 2050. Trillion. Who will afford this? I don't think average citizens would be able to. And if they will listen to this, they won't be able, or they even won't be willing to participate in it. So these are, I think, a couple of elements that we could discuss forward in the panel and maybe on a broader scale.
Great, thank you, Linnea. Tauba, did you want to come in there?
Yes, I want to come in because it's indeed very much part of the paper that we need to look realistically towards what's in front of us. But I think we also try to stress the data that exists about the cost of inaction. So there is very clear studies from the International Energy Agency, from the OECD, from the European Commission that shows that indeed the costs are very high, but the cost of doing things slower are actually much higher in the long term. And therefore, I think we know that it's a huge leap to make, but there is ways to move forward. And we have seen very innovative practices all over Europe, including on-bill renovations, for example, where financial institutions and utility firms kind of combine forces also with public entities to make renovations possible for households that pay no upfront cost, but that pay a small part of their utility bill. At the same time, their utility bill also decreases because of the renovation that they're doing. So renovations, to some extent, yes, there are an upfront cost, but they also immediately start bringing back on value on investment. So to me, it's kind of a no-brainer, knowing what we know, also knowing that climate change and climate impact of course, also is disproportionately affecting the same women who are in energy poverty and the same communities that are less affluent already. So I just wanted to add some data to this.
Thanks, Toby. I think the background to the paper and perhaps this discussion is this revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive last year, and it sets out these new targets on zero emissions, on renovating the worst performing buildings, and on energy performance, and on phasing out fossil fuel boilers by 2040 across the EU. I wondered, can we get some perspective from the panel on how those directives are being received by member states? Are they feasible? What's happening? Where are we at with it? Someone want to take that? Jessie.
I'd just come in and say, I think there's one other piece of very clear context here, and I think it's what our Polish colleague was referring to really, which is the ETS2. This is the extension of the emissions trading scheme to heating and transport. And here we do have the problem that we have tried to set a uniform price across the whole of Europe, despite the enormous diversity, particularly in heating, particularly in buildings, that makes that pricing, well, very unpopular with almost every Polish green I know. And many of us would happily see the ETS2 be rethought significantly. So that's landed very badly with member states. And then on the other side, we've got these much more bottom-up policies, which are essentially a mixture of guideline and standard setting and encouraging things like putting renovation on utility bills through energy performance of buildings, through the Energy Efficiency Directive more broadly. So I think we need to separate out which parts of the toolkit. And that probably brings us back again to the question of to what extent the EU can continue to come up with actual policy drivers as opposed to policy roadmaps in this space, and therefore how we indeed not just to move to coherence from the EU to the national to the regional level, but also to moving some of the tools and the decisions without losing ambition, without losing momentum, to that more bottom-up approach. Sorry, that's not a detailed answer, but I think it's part of our landscape.
Did you want to comment?
Yeah, no, I think the debate shouldn't be if it is feasible. I mean, it's feasible to reach the objectives, but you need to put policies in place, and you need to change the way things are being done. And one thing that is mentioned a lot in your paper and in this report of boosting participation in the energy transition is the role, for example, of one-stop shops, and the fact that people need to have somewhere to go to start. And I think it's really key to have these reference points linked to communities that can serve as mediators, even whenever there is discomfort with policies. And I think that, of course, this should come in different ways, and not only from Europe to imposing to the local levels, but rather to have everyone on board. I mean, participation is key if we want to have it.
Yeah, I just want to also stress that this is not like just one kind of policy option, like there's many other ones. In the previous panel, Professor Butti talked about that we need a new business model. I think if we know the science that is in front of us, this is not just like, oh, we might go in that scenario, or we maybe will do it, and we maybe will do it over the next decades. It is just we need to accelerate this transition if we want to be able to also have a planet for our children. So there's a bit of lack of urgency sometimes in these debates, I think. I think we have seen also during the COVID years what the EU can do and how it can also be innovative. We have thereby seen also social policies that were connected to the immediate impact of the COVID pandemic. I think it's very high time to understand that a crisis like COVID has nothing, or is nothing in comparison with the crisis that we have in front of us and is linked to the ecological crisis.
Thank you. Don't get me wrong. I mean, in Poland, we do believe in clean air. Okay, we're not some crazy bigots, who deny what is happening. But at the same time, we also believe in warm homes, stable prices, and national control over our energy systems. And if the energy won't be affordable or secure for the citizens, it will become a luxury. And it won't be a policy that is targeted at the poorest parts of the society. We are implementing. I'm not a part of the government, but in Poland there are certain subsidies for, but again, for those who can afford already. So there are a lot of projects to finance the solar panels. There are a lot of subsidies for the electric vehicles, but at the end of the day, they are not for everyone. They are rather for those who can already do it. We are doing it, but in our own pace. And I think that's also fine, because we are at the end united in diversity. So I believe it should be accepted that certain countries won't be able to be in line with what is happening. But on the other hand, if we look at how the rare earth materials are being extracted all around the world, actually the fact that we are importing them from Russia, that is, being called the worst, in the club, it's a hypocrisy again. So on the one hand, we are trying to stop importing the dirty energy sources from them, but at the same time, we are importing others, and nobody talks about it. So I think that's a kind of hypocrisy. Just the very last sentence. What kind of politician will tell to the people that they should actually sacrifice completely their comfort of living for the sake of implementing more radical policies? No politicians will, because politicians they don't do it because they want to win elections, and they are rather preparing themselves for the next term, not in the long term. And just the last thing, I'm so sorry, I'm always saying last thing, the role model, the model that should go maybe to other member states from Brussels. Okay, let's sacrifice our comfort of living. I can do this. Okay, I won't eat meat. I won't use my car. I will only use public transportation. But at the same time, those who are giving us the commands, or they are giving us some directions, cannot at the same time, for example, increase their budgets for private jet journeys, because that's not how it works.
I think we haven't really got much time, but perhaps a last question to the panel, and then we open up for a few questions from the floor. But this question about political kind of communication about these policies. What are some of the political challenges in talking about the transition, how it's pitched when it comes to renovating your house, which is obviously a huge kind of, it's one of the most personal things you could do in terms of the climate transition, and expensive. So how can we pitch that democratically to citizens in Europe?
Yeah, I will answer this as a politician, and it's on. Okay. So I will answer this as a politician. I think the question is not. I mean, you said, who is willing to tell people to sacrifice their well-being? For me, sacrificing well-being is not tackling the energy transition, because yes, maybe today you can go by car and have a heated home, but what will happen 10 years from now? And I think we need positive stories to tell about energy transition, and I think it's the only way to get people involved. And we most of the time get trapped into the bureaucracy of how to get things done, and we get trapped into how the process looks, but we don't focus on the results. And I think the results of energy transitions are good in terms of democracy, in terms of participation, in terms of people being comfortable in their own homes, being healthier. So I think if we focus on the results rather than on the process, that's already a good thing. And I think it would be a much more honest way to give citizens the choice on what we do today and how we do it. Because if you only give the choice, the immediate choice, of course, nobody will want to have work done on their houses if they can stay easily at home. But if you give the choice, do you want a safer house for you and your children, and a safer country for you and your children, safer Europe, safer world, then for me the decision becomes clear.
I don't say that we don't need some more inspiring politicians in the energy transition space. We certainly do. And there's a bit of a hunt for talent, quite frankly. But I think the most important point you've made is that there are many, many actors involved in the chain of the actors who need to be part of the renovation of the building. There's a lot of technical skills, there's a lot of awareness, frankly, there's a lot of quality control, because these are fairly new technologies, and there are a lot of contractual elements. These are some of the places where I would like to see the politicians get a little bit more granular, and I think that would communicate better. I remember a number of years ago, Enel looked at how they were going to get involved in building renovation here in Italy, and they realized that one of the assets they had was their workforce, about 30,000 employees, all of whom live in buildings, different cities, and they asked them to become part of an enormous survey process of what would be involved, encouraging them also to renovate there. But the point is, you start to both know what the problem is and to disseminate the conversation and the solutions. You look at the skills that you're going to need. We still have absurd gaps in mutual recognition of skills certificates around Europe in clean energies. And you start also to deal with some of the quality control challenges, because a lot of this is subcontracted and so on. So that was a good example. One more good example to cheer us up a little bit, and this is France on geothermal. Municipalities are trying to do geothermal projects. Geothermal companies tend to be quite small. There's a lot they don't know about each other. And I was told by a friend working in this field that actually you've started to see the French government step in and say, this is great, we'd like more of this to happen. This is ground source heat pump technologies, for example, for a street or a district of a city. So the municipality has to be involved. So they produced a standardized template contract. So you no longer had the municipality having to try and understand what geothermal might mean contractually, and the geothermal people trying to understand what a municipality might mean contractually. We can start to get considerably more granular, and I think this helps us with the communication, it helps us with the practice, and it helps us also realize about some of the other wider policy interventions that are going to be needed. I hope to see a lot of this in the EU housing and energy strategy.
Yeah. No, yeah. No, I just would like to finish my let's say contribution today, that I believe we need strong politicians who will prioritize the well-being of their citizens, who will prioritize the well-being of their citizens, and they will do what they say, because that's a problem that we're and that what we're experiencing right now, that politicians say one thing and then do a totally different one. And I think no to ideology and yes to the effective policy that will actually make a change in the future.
Thank you. And I think I would actually completely agree with what you're saying. I think on top of that, it's hugely important that we recognize the potential what we have in front of us. I think when we think about well-being of people, we have to think about the energy transition's opportunities to make people's life better, healthier, more democratic, and also more affordable. Honestly, I think we mentioned already the example of the on-bill renovation, but for example, also leasing of heat pumps, for example, sharing of tools and cars, and having like a really holistic strategy when it comes to mobility, but also when it comes to housing. There's huge things that can happen that can actually make the lives of people much better. And I think we cannot forget about linking that very much in the core of energy transitions.
Well, that's a nice positive point to make. Do we have any questions from the floor? I'm very conscious of time and that the bus was meant to be leaving at 6:30. I think might be leaving at 7:15. Is that right? So does anyone have a question from the floor? If not, I'm going to say yes. Maybe over dinner, right. Everybody go and change their shoes, whatever you need to do. And say thank you very much to our panel, and thank you for staying, everybody. It's been great.